Right. Episode 44 of Exit Liquidity. We have Amplice from Gearbox on.
Hi guys,
How you
how are
doing?
you?
Good.
Pretty good.
Really appreciate you. Really appreciate you coming on. Been Ali's been Ali's been trying to pill me on
Yeah.
Gearbox for like the
Yep.
longest time, and so I think this is gonna be a
Wait, you're
great
not pulled
combo.
already? How
Uh,
dare you?
we'll. I'm pretty much pilled, but I think this is more for
Mm-hmm.
for the people. Uh, we'll get started with like a
Yep.
quick intro
Yep.
on yourself, a little bit
Sure.
about your background, how you got started in the
Sure.
space.
So I feel like I've told this. I just got back from Istanbul, so I feel like I've told this story like a billion times. So basically, I have a background in finance. Like a long time ago, I was like a interest rate exotics trader. I left that to like do the nomad thing and like kind of figure out how to work online. Ended up like starting a kind of small scale private equity firm with some partners. And then at some point in 2017, one of those partners was like, "Let's do an ICO." And I looked into it, and I was like, "That this seems like a scam. I don't really want to. I don't really want to do that. Seems like you're scamming. You would just want to scam people and make a bunch of money, which I'm not on board with." So we had a big fight about that. But basically, learning about ICOs led me to like learn about ETH or Ethereum and smart contracts. Like, just made sense to me intuitively. I was like, this is actually like useful technology. All these people raising money are probably scamming, but yeah, Ethereum just made sense to me in a way that Bitcoin never did. Because like I didn't, as somebody with an economics background, the BTC security model, like in the long run, just didn't make sense to me somehow. And like I'm much more positive BTC now than I was back then. But like I just had this economics mindset instead of thinking it from a technology mindset. But anyway, so I learned about ETH and like I got a bag, and then of course like 2018 happened, everything went to zero. But I just held on, and I was like, this is going to be something. Then 2020 DeFi summer, like I was like watching the COVID maker crash in 2020. I was like watching that very closely, and then I basically discovered that, oh, people are actually building like real stuff now. They're not just like scamming with ICOs. So I kind of slowly got like drawn back in, got pilled, um, just like totally got. I don't know if you guys were around for DeFi Summer, but basically it was like you're on all the time. You had to be on all the time, and you got like really like I was just wired all the time, and I felt kind of bad. But like learned a lot, got scammed a lot, and then eventually I decided that like I can't. I don't really this like just degenning is not making me happy. Like I need to split my time between degenning and doing something I think is like worthwhile, quote unquote. And I had been making videos freelance for people in DeFi and stuff. Got hooked up with Ivan, started doing videos for Gearbox, and the rest is history, essentially. Yeah, so that's kind of my background. It's like a winding road towards being a kind of contributor, quote unquote.
Awesome. And so your current role right now, you'd say, is a contributor.
Yeah, I mean, it's a DAO, so we're all contributors in some sense. I'm in the marketing side. I'm not a dev. Not gigabrained like our devs are. So hopefully I can answer all of your questions about the protocol and whatnot. But yeah, I'm in the marketing side, but like we are really a DAO, right? Because the way that we launched the credit accounts originally was like DAO first. So yeah, there's not really a quote unquote team. I mean, we have 3 founders, but other than that, everybody's a contributor.
Awesome. And we like to ask a question. It revolves around the name of the podcast. You mentioned some of the moments of scams and uh, DeFi
Mm-hmm.
summer. What was your kind of, can you give us an exit liquidity story from your end that kind of is engraved into your
An
mind?
exit liquidity story that I did on people? No, I can't because I
Other way
was
around.
I was always I
Maybe
was
your
always in terms of one that I got
other way
rugged.
around.
I mean, there are loads. Um, so okay, so I got two, right? One was this protocol that was like called Synlev, supposedly, I mean, short for synthetic leverage. It was like basically like like you could buy and sell stuff on Uniswap, and the tokens were like 3x like ETH or something, like 3x time, like 3x YFI, 3x SNX, things like that. And it was like, yeah, tokenized leverage on not shit coins, but on like DeFi coins back then. And the dev like seemed to be legit, and he actually built something. But then at some point, like he just sold his token and disappeared off the face of the earth. So I was left holding bags. So that was pretty painful. What else? I got rugged in a different way on a project called Yield Wars. I think it was DeFi Yield Wars. I don't know if you guys were around for that. Basically, they were like gamifying DeFi a bit. So like they would have like YFI versus SNX, and then like the degens would just vote, and then the winners would take the losers' tokens or something. It's like a pretty
The
silly
most like
project. But it was
archaic
like
pair trading ever.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. I mean, not even close. It was just degen gambling to try and get tokens for this. Like, yeah. But I made like some sick videos for them, and I was like interested in seeing where they would go from this like pretty dumb but like meme friendly idea to actually building something. But then they just ghosted me, and I put in a lot of work into the stuff I made for them. So that was, yeah, that was pretty hurt my heart.
Dang.
Heartbreaking stuff, guys.
We let
Getting rugged is like getting
And-
rugged for money. For
Yeah.
me is like, okay, that's like law of the jungle, right? But getting rugged when you feel like you're building something with other people is much more painful. So if like Ivan or somebody, one of the founders, rugs me now,
Jesus.
I'm gonna be very, very, very sad. But they won't. Probably won't.
When you first came across Gearbox, what had you built into the ecosystem?
So I had been like looking for something that I thought was worth my time, right? Because like if I wanted to just degen, I could just degen, and honestly probably make more money. Just like be sharper and more on the ball with, instead of holding my shitcoins to zero or whatever. But like I feel like I don't want to throw shade on anybody. I feel like there are not, most projects are not like that great, are not great ideas. There may be good ideas or maybe mediocre ideas, but not great ideas. To me, when I heard how Gearbox worked, it just like, again, it was like hearing about smart contracts for the first time again. I was like, this totally makes sense. Like this is the way that we should be approaching DeFi. So like what pilled me essentially was, so like how Aave works, and I think Aave is great. It's like very decentralized lending, and like very permissionless, right? So you put your ETH, and then you can take out some other coin, and then you can do whatever you want with those assets. But the problem is like it's over. Not that Gearbox is under collateralized, but it's collateralized differently. The way that Aave is collateralized, like you put in 10 ETH, and you take out like 8 ETH worth of assets. And like that's good for like doing tax efficient things, and like good in some specific scenarios. But in the real world, like most borrowing, you borrow money because you don't have money, right? Like you wouldn't give $100,000 to the bank to borrow $80,000. Like it doesn't make sense. So what Gearbox does is like they have this DeFi primitive called the credit account, and the way it works is basically if you have your EOA or your wallet, you put in 10 ETH into the credit account, and you can borrow up to 110 ETH. But you can't just withdraw that 110 ETH, right? But the idea is like you can go and do anything you want in DeFi that has gone through our risk people and like we deem relatively safe and has enough liquidity, and like farm, trade, stake in Lido, whatever, blah blah blah. All the idea is like we want to integrate all of DeFi that is safe and tested. Then when you're done, let's say you made 5 ETH from all your DeFi stuff, then you have 115 ETH in your credit account. Then you can withdraw 15 ETH, pay back your 100 ETH loan plus interest. And basically it's like the credit account, I think of it as like a leverage enabled smart wallet. Essentially it gives you more kind of spending or investing power than you would have otherwise, right? Which is really how you would approach borrowing kind of in the real world. So it's like on-chain credit essentially. And that model of like having a separate account that works almost like a wallet just made so much sense to me. Yeah, and basically that's how I got pilled.
Yeah, I think that was kind of my like light bulb moment as well with Gearbox.
Yeah. Yep.
So that I guess that's like a pretty good explanation of like the core primitive that is everything is kind of built on top of. Can you explain a little bit about like how it's applied in? I actually don't even know what Gearbox V1 was. So if you have any information on that, that would be great. But specifically also how it's applied in V2 versus what's coming in V3.
Sure. So Gearbox V1 was kind of a proof of concept. Didn't get that much TVL. Basically, you could like essentially margin long or short like a couple of tokens, maybe ETH and WBTC, and maybe like a handful of others. But there wasn't that much leverage even. I think it was 5x max or something, or maybe even less. And then there was like maybe one or two strategies that you could put your assets into. So maybe like Yearn, like YV DAI or something, like just the basic DAI vault back then, or the USDC vault. And that was kind of it. Like there wasn't a lot of integrations essentially. It was just like, does this work? Can we leave it on chain for a while and not get hacked and just see how it goes, right? So that was kind of proof of concept stage. V2 was like, okay, this thing works. It's so far proven robust. Let's expand what we can do here. And at the time, to us, it seemed like leveraged farming was the thing to focus on. So we integrated a whole bunch of new farms. There were a bunch of technical improvements, which I won't go into, but like multi-call and things like that. And then so we integrated a bunch of new stuff, but also we like made just the UX much more friendly for leverage farming. So you could like one click ape into like 10x on your favorite stablecoin strategy, into Lido staking, or a bunch of other things. And that was like going really well actually. We got TVL like up to like 130 million for a bit. The problem being with leverage farming, it's hard. It makes sense when like interest rates are zero, but like when interest rates are higher, then everything just becomes like less attractive, I think, especially on the stablecoin side. So I think we still have like a good amount of leverage ETH staking, but on the stablecoin side, if the base strategy that you're aping into, so Gearbox has a kind of there's two parts to it, right? There's the borrowing side, which is kind of like the degen side, which we've talked about. But those funds that are being borrowed have to come from somewhere. So we also have lending pools, and there's a kind of chicken and egg problem where if your strategies on the borrowing side are not that high APY. So like if you think about a typical stable coin strategy in Convex or something, like maybe you're talking about like 5%, but maybe not even, right? Like your lending side, how much you're paying to borrow has to be lower than 5%. Otherwise, there's no point. In like if you lever up, you're just going to be losing money. So if you're paying 6% to borrow and you're only getting 5% in your strategy, then like nobody's going to do that. But on the lending, so like the lending side needs to be like lower than 5% in that situation. But like who's going to be in the lending pool getting less than 5% when the US government is paying you 5%? You see what I'm saying? So like I think the changing macro, we're all macro experts here. The changing macro environment basically meant that the lending side was less attractive. And so when there's not enough assets in the lending side, then the borrowing side becomes less attractive, because like how much you're paying, basically, if there's not the way that like the how much you pay to borrow depends on like how much liquidity there is on the lending side, right? So like when lending side is constrained, then obviously you got to pay more and more to borrow. And like there were some spikes and stuff, especially on the stables side of borrowing, because like we were liquidity constrained because rates went up. And so like borrowing became less and less attractive as well on the stablecoin with the stablecoin strats. Yeah, so I mean that's a long story short of saying that like V2 basically was focused on leverage farming, but like we saw demand on the borrowing side. We needed to figure out a way to make lending attractive as well, especially in the high rates environment. And so V3 is going to handle a lot of that, which I'm sure we'll talk about with like your next questions.
Yeah, we're getting into the weeds a bit on all the different versions of Gearbox. From a high level, explain it like I'm five kind of way. How would you explain kind of what Gearbox is doing now, what it'll be, and what it will be able to do?
Sure. So from a high level, V3 at the start is going to focus on margin trading, with the idea that being trading is like all season, meaning people are always punting coins, right? Whereas leverage farming, if the APYs are good, people might do it. If the APYs are not as good, people won't do it. People are always trading. And we offer basically trading where you won't get blown up if the platform that you're trading on gets blown up, right? Because like if you're trading on FTX blows up, you're dead. If you're trading on DYDX, what happened the other day? Okay, maybe you don't get blown up because you're covered by the insurance fund, but basically there's like platform risk essentially. And then something like GMX or something, for you to win at trading, that means LPs lose. And so like if traders consistently win, LPs over the long term lose, they pull the liquidity, there's no more trading. Gearbox allows you to trade against Uniswap liquidity or liquidity in the market basically. So we don't have that problem. So obviously there's still smart contract risk, but there's no like the house will blow up risk, I guess. So we're going to focus on margin trading. That's one thing to take note of. I don't know if I'm explaining this like you're five. But anyways, and then there's a bunch of risk stuff, which I'm
Close
not
enough.
going to go into because it's pretty complicated. But essentially, Gearbox V2 was constrained to very safe strategies and assets because we didn't have system-wide risk limits. V3 has system-wide risk limits, which means we can integrate increasingly degen strategies without worrying about blowing up the whole thing. And also, we can deploy to layer twos where liquidity is less available safely. So V3 opens up a whole bunch of new stuff. So new farms, new strategies, new assets, layer twos, increasing focus on trading for the time being anyways.
Do we know which layer
Yeah.
twos those would be yet?
Well, we've discussed it a bit with various L2 people. I'm not like we haven't decided fully. I think it partially depends on how much DeFi is on various layer twos, right? Because there's no point in levering up if there's no good strategies or assets to lever up on. And then also like I don't know. I think we're pretty partial to stimmies or stippies or whatever. So to the extent that there are layer twos who are offering incentives, that definitely sweetens the pot a bit for us. But definitely like we won't like if there's like a dead layer two that has no DeFi on it, then there's no point in deploying because nobody's going to use it because like no strategies, there's no point in using leverage, right? So definitely there needs to be DeFi on the chain, and then beyond that, we're open to discussions with any layer twos. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess is it correct to assume that Gearbox compared to like most other DeFi protocols, Gearbox would need a greater supply of liquidity than I guess a greater like supply to demand ratio than like the average, DEX, perp DEX, lending protocol, whatever. Just because of like collateralized nature, or is that like not as much of a consideration?
What do you mean when you say supply to
So
demand ratio? I guess.
like everybody obviously deals with the cold start problem when it comes to getting liquidity and getting demand. But my like the way I think about Gearbox is that problem is I guess I don't want to say more severe, but maybe like more difficult to overcome because in my head you
Right.
need more liquidity to make Gearbox work for the demand that it can bring.
Right. I see what you're saying. I think to some extent that's true. Like there needs to be a base layer of liquidity first. Like people need to be doing stuff on a chain, unlike an L2 already in terms of DeFi, for it to make sense for us to deploy there, right? Uh, because yeah, like we are essentially like a multiplier on any protocol that we
Yeah.
integrate. Like if people use it, right? Um, So, like in some sense, yes. On the other hand, I think the new things that we've introduced in V3 make it a lot easier and safer to deploy to places where maybe liquidity is a bit more constrained because we have these protocol wide risk limits that essentially like we can limit the the total position across the protocol in any given strategy or asset, which then makes it potentially profitable to deploy. To integrate things that like even with relatively low liquidity, especially if the accompanying tokenomics of V3 make it expensive to borrow that thing. So let me give you an example, right? Let's say there's hypothetically a new shitcoin that's like relatively low liquidity, but is like very popular on CT or something on a layer two. Um, we we would be able to integrate such a thing, um, probably long only at the beginning, but we would be comfortable doing that if like people were punting it a lot because it would generate fees for us, um, and the tokenomics would make it worthwhile because one part of the tokenomics is like token holders can choose which things they think are more or less risky and like make the borrow cost of those things more or less
Mm-hmm.
expensive, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if like some big whale who holds a bunch of gear was like, oh, people are punting this shitcoin and I hate this shitcoin, he could punish the people who are longing, and not punish but like make it more expensive for the people who are longing, um
Mm-hmm.
just because he like doesn't like that asset or thinks it's like a bigger risk to the system or something like that. And then also overall it would be safe because we would never have more of that asset in the protocol than the system wide risk limit would allow.
Mm.
That does that all
Yeah.
make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's pretty. The tokenomics are pretty complicated. I got them wrong explaining them previously on a podcast, and Ivan screamed at me afterwards, like the autist he is. But yeah, so like I'll try not to go too deep into that today, but
Sure.
yeah, like the tokenomics plus system wide risk limits makes it possible to deploy to L2s and integrate a bunch of assets and strategies that we previously
Mm.
couldn't.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's interesting just to hear like how you guys think about that stuff, given like what you can tweak and how the dynamics are kind of different on either side. I
Mm-hmm.
would like to
Yeah,
I would like to talk about security a little bit. I don't want to get too deep into it because I know it's
yeah,
pretty complicated stuff. Before I
yeah.
ask that, would you be able to just like rattle off a list of the V3 features real quick, because you've alluded to a couple, but just so we can like get them all in one place and understand what's coming?
Sure. So um, the thing I'm supposed to be shilling right now is margin trading, and it's I guess we're calling it
Yep.
pure, and it's like pure spot leverage basically, which means if you're long ETH, you actually have that ETH in your credit account. It's not an artificial ETH. It's not virtual. It's a real position in ETH on the blockchain from traded in from Uniswap or wherever. And the advantage of that is again platform risk, right? Both whether you're talking about like centralized exchanges which can just blow up and you lose all your money, or decentralized perp exchanges where it's a virtual position that exists in theory until like your counterparty can't pay, then it disappears, right? um uh like Gearbox pure trading uh, does away with all of that. You own the ETH or shitcoins or whatever that you're longing or shorting. Well, you don't own them if you're shorting, but you know what I mean. So that's a focus, and we're going to have a new UX for that, which is going to mirror basically what people are used to. So that's pretty exciting. System wide collateral limits. such that we can safely integrate a bunch of new stuff that's like viewed as less safe or has lower liquidity than the stuff we've already integrated. That's very exciting for me because I really want Gearbox to be like a leveraged DeFi smart wallet, basically, where you can like ape anything you want to within safe parameters. And this is on the road to making that happen. Then we have V3 tokenomics, which pretty complicated. Essentially, it allows token holders to push up or down the rates of the cost of borrowing on certain strategies or assets. So you can imagine it's like in some ways similar to curveonomics, VEnomics or whatever. But basically, like it will be potentially revenue generating if token holders want to move the APY, the borrow cost of a particular strategy up, most of that increase will go to them. On the other hand, you can imagine protocols getting involved because they want the borrow cost on their strategy being lower, right? So that there's more demand and more people ape. So there's like a dynamic between the borrowers, the lenders, and protocols who are integrated, hopefully creating some interesting interesting whale wars in terms of voting, but also kind of way for token holders to be rewarded for governance and so forth. So that's super exciting. Those are the main things, I think. But basically, the number one thing is the trading side. So like, if you've been blown up by FTX, or if you've had a bad experience trading on some other perp exchange because like you couldn't, I think, I'm not sure if this is true or not. I feel like at some point GMX limited trader profitability or something, because they didn't want LPs to lose too much money. I feel like, well, anyways, the point is, you're not trading against us. There's no house. You're trading against Uniswap LPs. So it's pure leverage and you own the assets that are in your credit account. Yeah, that's the thing I'm supposed to be focusing on.
Yeah, definitely the bit that I think we and probably a lot of our listeners will be most interested in as well. So circling back to security a little bit, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but
Yep.
I think a common thing that we see in crypto is sacrificing security, like in order to have efficiency or speed or cost efficiency or whatever. Like we see it with
Yep.
L2s, we see it with like a general lack of actual centralization. We see it with like, I don't know, centralized front ends. There's tons of examples of like trade-offs that people make for between like security and efficiency. And I feel like every time I read about Gearbox or Gearbox updates, at least as of recently when it comes to V3, security is always like top of mind. Do you know if there's
Yep.
any like, do you guys ever think about making any trade-offs when it comes to that? Or is it just, security comes above all else? We'll ship when it ships. We just want to make sure that we want to be 100% sure that nothing's going to break when we do so.
Yeah. So, I mean, 100% security comes first. Our devs are, I mean, smart contract devs and blah, blah, blah. We have a risk team. All of these people are extremely security conscious, but I do think there's like a good reason for that. And in that sense, yeah, like it'll ship when it ships is, I think, the way that we've approached so far. So the reason why we have to be more security conscious than some other protocols. So let's imagine you have a lending protocol, right? That's like siloed lending. Even if one of those pools blows up, as long as it's not too big, you can recover because it's siloed, right? And if you think about like Alpha Homora back in the day, I don't know if are you guys familiar with Alpha Homora? So Alpha Homora was, people thought that it was like similar to Gearbox, but actually it's not, because it's leverage, but it's strategy by strategy. So they were building like vaults that basically help you lever up on some urine strategy or whatever. You can get like 5x. But It was like each vault was individual, right? And you can imagine, like, as long as the vault that gets hacked or whatever is like not super large, you can potentially recover from that kind of thing as a protocol. Does that make sense? Because everything's siloed. With Gearbox, everything is composable. So potentially, like, if you have something that goes wrong in the protocol and you accumulate bad debt, that can create a cascading effect um, across the whole protocol, which basically, like, theoretically could mean like we get blown up totally, right? Um, because as so you can imagine, like, oh, let's say we integrate a token that like just rugs to zero immediately. Suddenly that token, which was worth something as collateral within the system, is worth zero, like just for whatever reason. Um, that means that the whole protocol does not have enough funds to pay back lenders, right? So then lenders stop pulling assets because it's like first to exit is going to get the most assets, kind of. And then you kind of have a bank run situation. And like in situations where your vaults or strategies or whatever are siloed, you don't have this problem as much. But with Gearbox, because we focus so hard on composability with wanting to be the centralized place for leverage, that is the risk that we're well aware of it, right? But basically, this kind of systemic risk is why, and the potential for like the protocol to be seriously harmed by this kind of systemic risk, cascading failure, is why we're so security conscious. It's why we didn't just like, oh, V1, we're going to integrate everything, right? Because you can imagine we integrate some vault that gets hacked. That's going to be a problem. It's why we, in V2, we didn't integrate like some of these less blue chip protocols that had farms that are making good APYs, and like probably would have increased the usage, and like boosted to TVL and whatever, and made more fees for the protocol. But we didn't integrate them because we hadn't come up with this system-wide risk limit that is the way that we can now integrate quote unquote less safe farms, or like less proven farms, let's say, and assets. Um, so yeah, the gigabrains are always hard at work, trying to figure out like how we can achieve our end goal of integrating everything that is safe in DeFi in a way that uh, doesn't kind of risk user funds, doesn't introduce like systemic risk to the protocol. And I think V3 is like a big step towards that goal.
Yeah, you mentioned the credit accounts, and I've read a bit about the ninjas within Gearbox. From a basic perspective, could you explain how that works? So if I logged into Gearbox right now and wanted to leverage farm or leverage
Right.
up on things, what's that process look like, and what's the technology behind that makes Gearbox safe?
Right. So the Leverage Ninja program was for V2, right? And essentially we had actually quite a high minimum asset that you needed to. So you like when you open a credit account, you have to put in some assets, and then you can borrow more assets. And we had I think it was 100K minimum, and then maybe we lowered that a bit later on. It was 100K minimum, and then like you could borrow up to $1 million or whatever. And the reason why and also to on top of that minimum, you also had to like just ask us to get access to Leverage Ninja. And the reason why we did, obviously, it's not permissionless, right? Like if you have to ask us, it's permissioned definitionally. And the reason why we did that is because number one, for the minimums, there's an attack vector you can imagine where if it was permissionless and with no minimums, somebody could, for example, open thousands of credit accounts, right? Each with very, very small amounts of collateral in it. So small enough that it's not worth liquidating for the liquidators, right? And then basically make the protocol accumulate bad debt. So that one of the reasons why we had this minimum was to prevent that kind of attack. And then why we wanted people to ask us, just like I think initially with V2, again, we were very security conscious. We just wanted to make sure, like, the people who were asking for access on the borrower side were either people we know at the beginning or people who like we've seen in the community, like they're real people, they're not North Koreans or whatever, um, whose only goal is to like exploit. And but although pretty much like everybody who's asked has gotten access over time. So yeah, just like increasing, I mean, just like the same security mindset that we've always had. With V3, I believe the minimums are either gone or like way, way, way lower, especially on the margin trading side. And I think you don't need to ask anymore. So quite kind of to become a ninja, you just need to you just need to like click the thing that says you're not a US resident, and then yeah, then you can ape. No need to ask us for permission anymore. So like, of course, like in an ideal world, everything is permissionless, everything is like 100% decentralized. I think we're working towards that, and it's like a step-by-step process.
Yeah, I think that that goes back to the security
Awesome.
question we had earlier as well. Kind of prioritizing that leverage ninjas was especially given like what you guys are doing, it seemed like a necessary step to have some sort of permissions baked in.
Yep 100%.
I haven't read about this at all yet. I was kind of just scrolling through your Twitter and came across it. I saw a couple mentions of intents being used in Gearbox. Can you talk a little bit about what that is, how they're going to be used?
Right. So the way I think, I'm not a technical guy, remember, so I might just be talking a bunch of bullshit. But the way that I think about intents is essentially like it's off-chain stuff that is triggered by on-chain stuff, essentially, right? Um, so like that could be as simple as a limit order, could be as complicated as an entire kind of trading strategy that has like multiple steps or whatever, but that's triggered by some activity on chain. So like what Gearbox has done essentially is we've created a bots infrastructure such that you can create automated strategies that are that like so let me give an example. So you could give a Gearbot, as we're calling it, um, permissions to do certain things in your credit account, but without the permission to withdraw. Like you can basically permission it to or not give it permission to do any of the things that you can do on Gearbox, right? So you might like allow it to ape some strategy, but not allow it to withdraw assets, increase collateral, or blah blah blah, or ape any other strategy. So it's like a fine-tuned permission system where you can then automate a bunch of things that you might otherwise have to do manually. And basically, we've created infrastructure for this. So let's say you wanted a bot, like you say you wanted to lever up and basically every 30 days deposit your stables into whatever was the highest yielding curve pool or something. And like you do a check every 30 days and it would just like transfer your assets to the highest yielding curve pool, right? With Gearbots, you can do that. Uh, Basically, with the infrastructure, you can do that in an automated way. So that's essentially an automated farming strategy, and then just like go on vacation or whatever, and not have to worry about it. And then you can also like set up liquidation protection. So if your health factor falls below a certain thing, just withdraw everything and close the credit account. Like it's up to you. You can permission the bot to do whatever you want. And basically, that allows a I mean the sky's the limit in terms of like what strategies you want, right? So whether it's trading strategies or farming strategies, or like you want to switch between you know staking ETH and having your ETH somewhere else, any number of things are possible with this bots infrastructure, um, which is basically like how we're building on the idea of intents. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. There was a bit of a discussion on like the minimum viable tokenomics for Gear the past few months. What were the latest updates on like the token design that you guys are thinking about, and some of the changes that will be implemented in
Sure.
V3?
So the tokenomics, I got this wrong last time, so I'm gonna be fired if I get it wrong again. So I'm gonna keep it pretty high level. But basically, what we've done is we're going to allow token holders to vote up or vote down the cost of borrow on strategies and or assets, right? And then so there'll be a minimum. So you can't vote it to zero, obviously, right? So let's say like we have some curve strategy. We would have like based on our risk people's assessment and the devs assessment, we would have like a minimum borrow cost for the strategy, and then like a maximum borrow cost for the strategy. And essentially, let's say it's like a stable coin strategy. So you borrowed USDC from Gearbox and then put it into the strategy. Essentially, the borrow cost you'd pay on that USDC would be in part controlled by token holders, right? So token holders within this parameter of like minimum and maximum would be able to increase or decrease the borrow cost for that particular strategy. And essentially the part of the spread between what the lending pool people are getting paid and what the borrower is paying would go to the protocol. And a part of that would also go back to the lenders, obviously. So that basically gives incentives for lenders to so if they don't like a specific strategy, like they see risks in a specific strategy that aren't in other strategies, they could vote up the the cost of borrow on that strategy to like be compensated for the risk, the additional risk that they feel they're taking. Borrowers would obviously like the strategies that they're in. They would vote if they had Gear token, they would vote down the cost of borrow on their strategies. And then also, of course, like protocols themselves. So let's say this is a Curve strategy, right? Curve might be interested in acquiring Gear such that they could keep the cost of borrow low on all Curve pools, so that like that pumps their TVL, obviously, because like it's levered. Yeah. So hope like this is kind of, I guess, the first version of the tokenomics that we're going to be pursuing. I hope I got that right. Seriously.
I think,
Yeah. I mean, essentially,
I think as far as I know, it was correct, but I'm definitely not an expert on that. And it makes sense. Is there a future where protocols are also going to be maybe bribing or something to get more favorable terms from voters on their strategies?
Yeah. So I guess you would be talking about like a convex style type thing on top of Gearbox tokenomics. So I think there's interest in. I don't think the core devs would build that kind of thing ourselves, but definitely if there are devs out there who are interested in building such a system on top of Gearbox, there would be interest in and probably like some kind of grant or something like that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I expect that over time such a thing will happen. I don't think it will come from the core devs for various reasons. But if other people are interested in building this kind of system on top of Gearbox, definitely that's something we're open to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes sense. I mean, someone always like steps up and does it. Like Maverick has like
Yep.
3 or 4 projects waiting to do that, and they haven't even like launched their gauges yet. Like Magpie's picked it up for like 5 or 6 different projects. So I think that would.
Yeah, I feel like every project that has introduced some kind of like gauges has eventually has a DAO or something that's building that system on top of it, like Convex is on Curve or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I expect it will happen. I don't think it will come from the core devs, but definitely if somebody, community member, whatever, is interested, we would be very open to that.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Circling back to leverage spot trading specifically, the past,
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe the past 3 or 4 months, a very popular topic has been the wave of Uniswap v3 based derivatives projects, which are obviously different from Gearbox, but it's the only,
Right.
I want to say, the only other way out there on the market for leverage trading that isn't against a house necessarily. That's just backed by
Mhm.
Uniswap in the
Yep.
same way that Gearbox is. And I'm sure,
Yep.
I don't know if I've seen too many comparisons being made on like Twitter and stuff like that, but I'm sure that's something that the team at Gearbox has been thinking about, or you guys have looked to at least. Um,
Mhm.
do you, is that still like, was that ever a part of the design process, like thinking of going that route, or do you guys see Gearbox margin trading as being inherently better or worse in some ways than that approach?
So I guess you're talking about things along the lines of like Infinity
Exactly. Yeah.
Pool, things like
Infinity
that.
Pools, Panoptic,
Yeah.
Smiley, all those guys.
Panoptic is more. I don't know anything about Smiley. Panoptic is more like options, I
Yeah,
think.
it's the same
Or is that
underlying
wrong?
infrastructure. They just model it
Right.
as options, as perpetual options.
Uh-huh. Right. Yeah. So definitely the Gearbox team has thought about this. Probably on the dev side, not so much on the marketing side. So I haven't spent a lot. I mean, I think I got the Infinity Pool pitch deck at some point, but I looked at it and I was like, don't really understand how any of this works, and didn't look too much deeper
Mhm.
into it. So, like, to be honest, I haven't thought that much about it. I think those things, are they live yet? I don't think Panoptic is
Panop
live. Is
uh
Infinity Pool
I
live?
know Good Entry is one that's been live for a while. That one's on Arbitrum. It's a little bit
Mm-hmm.
smaller. I want to say
Right.
Infinity Pools might be an alpha or something, but I'm not entirely sure about that at all. It's still very early. Like the major players, the big names that everyone's been talking about haven't launched yet.
Yep. Yeah. So I think like the way that I think about these things is like maybe there's some amazing uh, system out there that can work, but like I'm default skeptical because I've heard it all before. Like I've been through DeFi Summer, well, DeFi Summer the original, and then like supposedly DeFi Summer 2.0. Like I've I've heard all of the promises and whatever from various teams about like, oh, we've solved X, we've solved Y. The number of times I've heard like, oh, we've solved impermanent loss for Uniswap LPs is just like, yeah, like if I had a nickel for every time I heard that, I'd be a billionaire. It's not true, right? Like when it comes down to fundamentals, you kind of for the Uniswap LP thing, like there's no way to get rid of impermanent loss. Like it's just not possible without. I mean, yeah, it's essentially it's not possible without like you. If you're hedging, then you need to pay the cost for hedging, which is going to take away the profit from your LPing, right? There's no like free lunch. So without speaking to any particular design or any particular project, I think naturally I'm skeptical of people who say that there's this new cool way to do this thing that like nobody thought of before. Um, but leaving that aside, I think the beauty of what Gearbox margin trading is that it's like very simple to understand, right? Because we're not really building a new layer or whatever on top of V3 or Uniswap V4 or whatever. Like it's not built on top of Uniswap. It's basically like there's a lending pool, you have a credit account, people lend you money, and then you go and do the whatever you're gonna do. And like that's like a system that just it makes sense and it works. And it's not hard to understand how it works. Right. So like I could see I feel like I can see the ways that our system could potentially break, which is like something that somebody's trading that like we have a lot of in the system goes to zero, then it's a problem. And when things are so like when all the pieces make sense and are easy to understand, well, I feel like they're easy to understand because it's just lending and borrowing, right? It's just credit. Then I feel like the potential ways that it can go wrong, at least we know what they are. with something that I think is hard to understand, like infinity pools or some other, like all of the protocols building on top of V3. I'm not saying they won't work, but it's kind of like, okay, you have to be on chain for a few years at least before I'm going to believe that you've found a way to achieve like leverage just on top of this LP position in a way that's safe and can't be exploited. Does that make sense? So like I naturally have skepticism. That doesn't mean I'm not going to ape their coins or whatever, but like if I were trading based on the history of crypto, I would be more comfortable trading uh, with a with a protocol that is fully on chain that makes sense to me, I guess. And like maybe I'm just not smart enough, but I don't. When I look at these like things building on V3, I don't fully grasp them immediately, and maybe that's just because I'm like mid IQ or whatever, mid curve.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the skepticism is definitely like well founded. We have to see this stuff like actually work before we can say that it works. It's interesting because like what some of them are hoping to do like covers a pretty like wide base. Like you mentioned, like solving impermanent loss while also giving you, access to 1,000x leverage with no liquidation or time-based liquidation or
Right,
funding-based
right.
liquidation.
Like you hear that, you hear like 1000x on your position with no liquidation risk, and like to me, like I'm immediately like warning, like alarm bells are going off in my head, because I've heard it all before. Like, so I guess the onus is on them to prove to me that like they're right and I'm wrong. Is kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And given where we're at right now, it's tough to say that's there. I'm excited for them to launch, definitely, just to see how those claims play out. But
Yep,
I will
100%.
say that Gearbox definitely is like the simplest approach to leverage spot trading that I've seen, at least. Yep. We're coming up on time here. We have a hard stop in 4 minutes, so just want to make sure we get to everything. Is there anything that we missed that you might want to give us like a heads up on? Anything you want to shill? Any calls to action? Now would be a great time to put that out there. And if you're able to give us some sort of a launch date or a timeline, that would also be awesome. I don't know if you can do that, but would be cool to hear.
Yeah, 100%. So I am definitely supposed to be shilling margin trading or pure leverage or whatever is the latest thing that I'm supposed to say. So pure leverage on Gearbox, basically, it's like you're trading against Uniswap V2 or V3 LPs. It's pure. There's no house. So definitely try it out when we launch. We will, I think, have also kind of a referral system. I don't know if that's going to be ready day one, but it's coming. So look out for that for sure. Everybody loves ref links, right? And then in terms of the date, I was told with much confidence last week that we're going to be deploying like in the next couple of weeks. So it should be pretty soon. I can't give you an exact date. Gearbox is modular. So like the deployments always take longer than you expect because it's like, oh, you have to deploy this piece and then you have to deploy this other piece. It's like, yeah, but that's part of the reason why like we can kind of take bits out and replace them so smoothly, I guess, and so safely, more importantly. So yeah, in the next 2 weeks, margin pure leverage should be out. You should be able to trade spot with a nifty UX as well. So definitely look out for that. Yeah, that's it, I guess.
Awesome. 2 weeks. Looking forward to that. It's been it's definitely been a long road. Excited to see how
100%.
how this stuff plays out.
Me too. I'm pumped. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we really appreciate you coming on. This was great. I mean, we've talked about Gearbox as early on this podcast, at least as early as like, I don't know, maybe like March, April, maybe. Yeah, it was definitely.
Did I pill you?
Yeah.
Are you pilled?
Oh yeah, I'm already pretty much like pseudo pilled, just being
Pseudo
around
not-
Ellie.
pilled
Like
is something else entirely.
his
That's the wrong coin, sir.
his he's pilled me on gear, like by just saying that he's going to be the biggest holder of gear in the next
I don't know
year
about
since
biggest.
like
I'm gonna do my
March.
best,
respect
but
that. I'm doing my best too. Yeah.
Cool, awesome. Well, thanks again. That's episode 44. Thanks everybody
Great.
for coming.
Thanks.
you guys.
Questions are great.
Thanks, Amp.
Pleasure. Thanks.